Okay, here we are, third time round. We're still continuing to build on what we've been developing so far. So in the first two clips, we've looked at the idea of extending a melody or creating or building a melody out of chords, and particularly traditional 1-4-5 chords in Western harmony structures, and then just making the melody have a little bit more flow by adding in passing notes. And then in the second clip, we looked at auxiliary notes. So here we're going to have a look more closely at the role of the dominant chord and the dominant seventh chord. So I'll just minimize my keyboard image there. So we're back to the same piece that we created for the second clip, which was also derived out of the first clip. What I'm going to do here is get rid of this bar, the contents of this bar. Let's make this an ongoing organic process here. I'm going to put in my a G chord in this bar. Okay, so we'll end up with chord 1 in this bar, chord 5 in this bar, and a chord 5 in this bar, and back to chord 1 in this bar. Okay, so here's my, why is this doing this funny thing? I need a note here. Thank you. Give me a note. Might help if I use my devices around the right way. Okay, so here's this chord. For the minute, I'll just put in my G chord here. So you can see this is your G chord here. So I'll go back again. I'll put it. The light's not very good in the room here, so I'm having to squint a little bit. Okay, so here we go. We've got a melody. If you've looked at the first two clips, you'll see that the melody was derived out of a chord 1 in the key of C major in bar 1. Originally it was chord 4 in this bar, but I'm changing it now to chord 5. This is also a chord 5 structure in this bar, and this is back to chord 1 in the key of C major. So what I want to have a look at here in this exercise is the use of the dominant and dominant seventh chord, all right? So this bar, as you've already seen from the previous two clips, is one way of extending and developing a dominant seventh chord melodically. Right? Let's have a look at some other ways we can do this, because I noticed that many times with melodic dictation exercises or melodic transcription exercises that you need to engage with for the purposes of EC examinations, there's often an outline of a dominant seventh chord. And it's so obvious to my ear that it's a dominant seventh chord. I can hear it. But because students aren't understanding the shape of the melodies and the conventions that composers work with, they're not immediately recognising it. So I'm wanting to articulate this a little bit more for students so they're more aware of it. They're just a little bit more present to it when they encounter it. So here is my dominant chord. Now I'm actually going to add a seventh to this as well. All right. So I'm happy to play it, but I don't think the quality of playback here is brilliant. So good. Now, obviously, I want to do something interesting with this bar because that's too static. It's not singable enough. So I'm going to do something like this. I'll delete that for the minute and I'll explore a little bit. Right, now, you can see here what I've got. If you recall the chord that I put in before, I had put a dominant seventh chord. So that in the key of C major, that was a G, B, D, F, right? You saw that clearly a moment ago. Now, all I've done is I've created a little bit of a melody, a melodic feature here, which outlines that dominant seventh chord, right? So that's G, F, D, B, A, G. And you start to see here, that's a passing note. I've added in a passing note. There's one of your small melodic conventions, okay? But the rest of it's just basically a dominant seventh chord. It's G, F, D, B, G. When we have a leap of a seventh like this, because this is a minor seventh, for those of you that have been working on your music theory books and you're up to date with everything, you'll understand that the distance between the G and the F is a minor seventh. Right, if you have a leap that size in the context of a melody, it's usually good if you can approach the leap from within the interval and depart it within the interval, right? Now, in this instance, I have approached the interval from outside. I have approached that -7 from outside of itself, right? So the E there, the E before the G, is outside of the interval. It's below or outside of that -7. It would have been good if I'd maybe approached it from the A or the B on that fourth beat of the first bar, but it's not to be for the minute because this is just an illustrative exercise anyway. But you can see that I have departed that leap within the -7th, right? And usually you'll get a more singable melody if you follow some of these simple rules. These were the old sort of Baroque rules. We don't have to follow them when we write our own melodies these days, of course. Anything seems to go these days, but these were the older, more traditional rules which helped to keep chorale singing and choral work lots more flowing and singable, basically. So I'll give that a shot. I don't know how well you'll hear it, but let's give it a go. Goodo. Now, that's all fine, well and good. You can hear and see that your dominant seventh is outlined there and your plain dominant chord is outlined there. Now, if I show you this, I'll get rid of this bar for a minute. I'm going to delete this bar. What will often happen is once you've got that dominant seventh chord outlined, you will get your that chord usually comes neatly back to a tonic chord, right? So I've shortened it, I've truncated this a little bit. Let's have a listen. Yeah, it usually, well, after you have a dominant seventh chord, it usually somehow comes back to that tonic chord, right? So there's all sorts of possibilities and permutations. So let me insert a bar. Is that going to give me one after that? Yep, okay. I'm going to come back to the C major chord. I'll insert another bar. And I'm going to put a note up here. So I've extended the melody a little bit now. And you can see I've got chord 1 in bar 1, a chord 5-7 outlined in bar 2, another chord 1 in bar 3, another 5-7 chord outlined in bar 4, and chord 1 again outlined in the final bar. Right? Now, I could embellish this part here by adding in passing notes. Okay, so I might add in a passing note there. I'm going to change that to a quaver. Okay, so I've got quite a flowing and interesting looking melody happening there, right? So the top note's the F, right? So again, I don't think you'll hear this very well, but I'll just run it through quickly. Yep. So, all right, basically what I'm trying to illustrate in this activity here is that the dominant seventh is often outlined prior to some sort of melodic flourish on the tonic chord. Right, and that's just something I'd like you to bear in mind when you're dealing with melodic transcriptions, that you'll either have the dominant chord or the dominant seventh outlined before a tonic chord. And you can see that basically in every single bar here, this is not the most flowing, beautiful or graceful melody that I think I could devise, but essentially I'm just working to create this to illustrate some points here, which have to do with the chordal structure of melodies, the use of passing notes, the use of auxiliary notes, which I don't think we've got any examples of that here, but also the outlining and the use of the dominant seventh chord, which has a very strong urge to always want to resolve back to the tonic chord. So you can see dominant seventh here in the key of C major, which is built of G, B, D, F, has an urge to return to the tonic chord here. And again, the dominant seventh is outlined again, but in a slightly different way. You can see F, D, B, G here. Okay, and that's resolving to the tonic chord. So that's just a little fine point that I wanted to raise. You will see this type of configuration in many classical works, in all sorts of melodic transcription pieces, hearing the outline of that dominant or dominant seventh chord just prior to a statement of a tonic chord. Thank you for listening.